on Tuesdays here at Gimbalabs since I think like April of 2021. And by last year in October, we'd kind of figured out a system of just allowing anybody who wants to bring a proposal topic to the table. So I shared in Gimbalabs Discord, and I'll just drop it again here in the Zoom chat, the link to our public Miro board. And the way it works is anybody who wants to can just add themselves as a presenter to this agenda. You don't have to ask for permission. If there's ever a topic that you want to present on, you can do it here. Just share your name and a topic, and then you're officially signed up to present at Playground. And what we try to do is kind of walk that line between technical discussion and the implications of the technology, much like kids do on a playground, right? You can talk about how to have the most fun on the swing set, and then you can test the limits of that. Who can jump the farthest? But what are the implications of trying to jump the farthest? So here we are. I'm really excited that Darlington jumped on the agenda a couple of weeks ago after it sounds like a pretty provocative discussion in Twitter Spaces. And so, as always, Darlington, thanks for signing up. Welcome. And yeah, I'm excited to hear the technical and implication level aspects of what you've got for us today.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I should come to these more often. I had to take time off work today. There's half the year where this does not fall on my lunch break. So then coming is a challenge, and then the rest of the other half of the year is exactly on my lunch break. So I think we're getting to where the time in the US will change again, will fall back, and then it will be within my window. But glad to be here to have this discussion. Just a little bit of background. Different people's been talking about reputations, ideas around proving things, SSI, DIDs, identities. And then with someone in the Catalyst ecosystem, a few of us have been talking about data management and crowdsourcing, collaboration, and distributing data sources and things like that. And so the wheels that's sort of been turning in my brain, let me see if I can find that tweet that's been turning in my brain around that is, especially with the work that Light Nation is doing, but obviously this can apply to any other community. It would be nice if we had a way for someone to come in and connect their wallet and then be able to have a community look at their wallet and say, okay, because of something or collection of things that are in here, I know where you've been and where you might go. And so that gives you certain privileges or ability to do certain things without having any pre-approval, without having to give up your identity, things of this nature. So for example, if I wanted help, say aggregating all of the funded corporations and company in Catalyst, I could get people to do that. Or I could say, hey, if you've done these 3 things in Catalyst, you're trusted enough, you can append this record, right? Maybe there's attestation periods to that, or there's some kind of threshold aggregation that needs to happen for that to get put into some final record. But just the concept, if you wanted to enable these kind of flows, right? A person comes into a community, they have a wallet, they connect their wallet, and that immediately gives agency without any pre-approval, right? How might we structure something like that? And something that is not waiting for SSI, or maybe it taps into that, but this is not an Italo-Prism thing. Like, how can we have some sort of federated or decentralized way of just even empowering that without too much control or structure in the middle of it? That's a lot of words. Some of those words are feelings and not logical, sensical things. So maybe I'll just pause and have people respond to that or receive that.
Well, hey, Lido.
Yes.
Is it appropriate for me to chime in at all?
Yes.
You
have agency.
I mean, well, yeah, about agency and about kind of going about this using Cardano wallets, and you had just kind of talked about, going and basically just sign in with your wallet and have agency, and you have to prove that you are the owner of that wallet for that to occur, right? So generally that happens with like message signing, and you can use just normal auth tokens and kind of have users renew those auth tokens on a either 30-minute or hourly basis, and kind of have accounts based on that, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Right now is kind of open, right? So that's one idea, right? And I would like to just start with what I'm feeling, and then maybe have other people share how that I've said so far hits them, and then we can get into some of potential implementations type things too, right? But yeah, that is part of what I'm talking about, right, Leaf? Yes. A.
Hey, Darlington. Nice to catch up with you. My question here is more around how can I put this? How much of a pain point is this compared to how things usually? Hey, Lucy. Compared to how people normally do it, which is I trust, and again, it's a bit of a weird thing because things like nepotism creep in, but then usually it's not really nepotism, is just who you know, and you kind of need to trust someone to do something which you need to get done. So in a way, it's like, okay, how much of a pressing issue is this that we need to kind of create this kind of objective way? If someone meets XYZ, if someone has XYZ token, then they can be able to do a thing, right? And what security, because in my mind, like security stuff just sort of like comes to mind, because in a way there you're taking away the, hey, I trust you, person B, to do this thing because like I kind of know you, and then I compensate that person, then that person then does the same thing continued, right? It's not an objective interaction, it's a subjective interaction. Does that make sense, what I'm trying to say, Darlington? All right, cool.
Yeah, so so the question is how much of a need it is, or of a problem the lack of having a subjective interaction is right now?
Yeah, like how you thinking about that balance, right? Because from my perspective, it's like, yeah, basically, how are you thinking about that balance? Because we can create tools to do that objective part, but then like, is that what we ought to be optimizing for, or should we be optimizing for improving the subjective, like person to person, and sort of have the questionable, like, is this nepotism, is it not, kind of conversation?
Yeah. Well, and other people can chime in, but my own selfish desires is around having subjective flows that are around communities and not so much person to person, right? To say, hey, we need to be able to do these different things, and we want it to be decentralized-esque as much as possible, right? So the motivation for this conversation, and maybe my thinking around what we might be optimizing for, is just how do we just lay down some frameworks and tooling, or like, I don't know, rivers of stuff that people can plug into as they see fit, right? So Lido Nation can plug into the river and say, I'm going to subjectively look at these particular events and give it meaning when you come to Lido Nation. But by no means the river is intending to enforce anything of any sort, at least in my head. So how we sort of get that flow of information swimming, whether that's tokens or NFTs or DIDs or stuff in metadata, or all the combinations thereof, whether that involves, you know, multi-signature transactions or threshold-based aggregation and all of those sorts. If it's possible to have just a generic pool of stuff that communities can pull from and build higher level primitives to say, if you have this stuff here, it subjectively means something for this community, is sort of what I'm thinking and feeling. It's a pressing need, right? And explicitly to put this into an immediate use case that Lido Nation would like to have is Catalyst data, right? I would like for anybody to be able to contribute to the Catalyst data effort that I have going without having to talk to me. But I'm sure there's many other
Cool.
use cases, right? So
Cool. Just a quick follow-up. It feels like I'm on an earnings call. A quick follow-up. Yeah, so with the kind of automation, of that kind of, creating that objective thing, um, that's interesting, but I feel like that also kind of speaks to another level, which is actually validating that the work is done. So for example, with your Catalyst example, someone, I suppose, could just like populate stuff which isn't actually on Catalyst, kind of thing, like who verifies it, kind of thing, right? Because if you've automated the the objective part, if you meet these thresholds, kind of thing, yeah, like what does that say for the conclusion aspect of it? Thank you.
right. And I think in my head is one impossible problem at a time. And I'm sure different communities will have different ways of validation. I don't know if we need to solve both, or that both are contingent on each other, right? I think they can be modular, that validations could be plugged in, it could, and interchangeable, but yeah. Nori, my good sir, good to see you. It's been a while since I've seen you in a space. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it's been a while. Good to see you, Darlington. I love this idea. We've been talking about other things. I'm currently installing and playing with like Cardano Press, which kind of has a similar kind of feel, but it's only inside of the WordPress realm, where looking at your wallet, it'll open up sections of the website if you hold an NFT or certain tokens. And it's kind of a decentralized way of kind of that gatekeeping, so human doesn't have to make that decision. I think that has so many applications, like complete this PBL course, get this NFT. Now you can actually unlock the governance or the management portion for this next thing, like Gimbalabs has been talking about. Or if you're in D work, you can make up a mechanism where you can take these tasks if you have this kind of community credentialed thing, whether it be completing a PBL course or having some participation tokens. We could even lock down these Zoom meetings, so we're not afraid to share the link over Twitter, but you can only log into the Zoom meeting if you have Gimbals in your wallet, to prove that you're part of the community and have interacted in some way in the past. Things like that become totally possible. And once it starts to hit that kind of critical threshold where we're building on top of it and have these primitives and everything's being unlocked, I can see it becoming almost magical. Like It's like, oh my God, of course it'll work this way, or all these great ideas will feed off of each other. But I think it's a key. It's not just about DIDs. I think we need to be flexible and be able to query and say, do you have tokens or do you have NFTs or whatever it is, and have that trigger something, either access or responsibility or voting rights or all those kind of things, or even event tickets or things like that are totally possible using this kind of mechanism. So I love the idea and hope that we can build towards it.
%. Go ahead, James, please.
Yeah, Nori, I agree with that. And Darlington, you started by asking us, how we feel as well, which I think is an interesting prompt, because a lot of us go to the technical parts, and it's really exciting to arrive at these technical questions. But starting from a place of feeling, and also to A's point about nepotism, it's really interesting. I'm feeling like I just want to try stuff without asking for permission. One of the nice things about that approach is that this, any distributed ecosystem opens the opportunity to try stuff. You don't have to ask for permission. There's a marketplace for ideas. You can go out there, you can say, hey, you know what? We're not sure if there's a standard for this problem yet. Here's what we're trying. Here's a prototype of a standard that we're trying. And then other people, maybe they adopt it. Even better, maybe they look at it and they say, you know what, your standard's okay, but here's how we could improve it, right? There's nothing inspires action like proposing something and giving it to people to push back on. Hey, poke holes in this. We invite that. So it's exciting to be there, but this does quickly lead to something maybe like nepotism, like A is saying, where only insiders understand how a system works. So, when you're small, you can try stuff without asking for permission. But if what you build starts to impact other people, I think all of us have a responsibility to share how it works with other people. And that's both a technical problem and a systems problem. That's kind of interesting. And so just to pause for a second, a lot of people showed up after we started. Just welcome everybody. This is a weekly playground meeting. And we do not require anyone to ask for permission to present here. The way it works is we meet every Tuesday at the same time. And if you want to present your ideas, you can use the Miro board link that I just dropped in the chat. And that link will take you directly to a sign-up chart where you can see who's scheduled to present. You can see that Lido is here presenting today. And you can see that October and beyond, there's open slots to present here. And what's special about this space is that we kind of toe the line between technical discussions and the implications of those technical discussions, both the how do we do it and how do we feel about it. So if that's a helpful space for anybody, Dan, I know that we were talking over DMs yesterday, so welcome. That's the process for sharing your ideas, and to everybody else who's here for the first time or the first time in a while. It's good to see you. It's good to see ADAO represented, and welcome to everybody else.
Yeah, I would love to hear. Oh, go ahead, James.
No, sorry. I just want, so reiterating the point about, not asking for permission, but what are the implications of that is kind of how I'm feeling right now.
Right. I would love to hear from other people as well. If anything has been said so far, where does that take you mentally or emotionally?
I feel like you're talking about me, Darlington. Not that I'm taking it personally, but I avoid job-like activities while I may remain pretty much completely engaged with Catalyst. I love the high level conversations. I love helping people think through a problem. And I have known from the beginning, this is almost impossible for most people to describe. It's difficult for me to describe that. I didn't have that description of myself when I started in Catalyst. It's been a part of my process in it. And what's so fascinating about approaching being involved in Cardano and being involved in this Catalyst community with that perspective is I get a huge amount of satisfaction. I get a huge amount of satisfaction. And I get enough positive feedback to continue. But that does nothing to, validate me on chain. I've got some gimbals, like that would be something you would look at because, James is not just tossing those around on the road. So that would tell you something about me, but not much else. I think if people were to take a peek at my wallet, they might think I was an NFT degen, and I think about it as diversifying my investments, but it's relative. But I mean, these are real issues, right? This is a real thing. Being helpful, being engaged, understanding what's going on, and yet not having, a law degree, a computer science degree, a 20-year resume, and we want to bank the unbanked, right? We're talking about billions of people like me. So, and I don't mean to be egotistical and say that these people should identify with me. I'm just saying I'm like one of these billions of people. And that's why I appreciate what you're talking about, because this is the majority of people that will end up in the Cardano ecosystem, whether they know it or not. How are they valid? How are they valuable? Without all of the usual bullet points.
Right. Thanks for that. Those are all good things I would like to know too myself. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a developer or anything of that nature. And so I can tell you just, I don't feel like I'm part of the blockchain per se, right? Like, I feel like I'm part of the community, and I come and I hang out with people and I learn all sorts of stuff from different people on Twitter and the Cardano community. But as far as validation, I think it's going to be very hard to find any sort of validation without having the ability to build it.
True words, Mr. Lee.
Hey, Darlington, I came late to the meeting, so I didn't get the question. Would you repeat that, please, for me?
Yes, the TLDR is just coming together and thinking through what it might look like to have a situation where you go into a community and in a non permissionless way, that community can know what you've done, where you've been, some kind of history, some proofs of your past deeds, right? And they can ascribe any sort of value to that if they want, right? So if you come to Lido Nation and I see that you've had this much participation in Catalyst, that gives you agency on Lido Nation without having to get any sort of permission ahead of time if I chooses to use it that way, right? So just thinking about that, what does your head go hearing that, or how does that make you feel hearing that? And then, yeah, so that's what we're at now. I have another prompt if nobody else has anything to add to this.
Got it. I think the first thing that came to mind is how much is enough to know about someone. You know, if we come here and participate and we show that we are willing to do things, and you know, but how much is worth it to know about someone on beyond the things that they show, you know. I think we here are building based on what we see. We don't need to, I think we don't need to dig that much into someone that comes here and participate and show interest and learn and share. So that's the way I feel. I mean, I think I trust any of you guys a lot enough by just coming to this media and sharing. Did that answer the question?
Thanks for contributing. Yeah. I don't know what people are gonna say. I don't have any expectations. Yeah, go ahead. Chakan.
Hi. So hearing you once again go over it in the TLDR, it's like I love the idea because it's basically what we're trying to build at Littlefish with actions. So what we realized is we're having this a more internal community perspective, but we're aware that what we're building is very useful across communities, because basically what it is you take some actions within your community and then you document those actions using NFTs. And in your wallet, there is all your actions that you've taken within your communities, which we call colonies. So if you're a member of Gimbalabs, you do a few things here and there. You create a few actions for Gimbalabs, and there you go. In your wallet, there exists exactly what you did in the way that you documented in your wallet. So when you go from Gimbalabs to Littlefish, we immediately know, oh, you're affiliated with Gimbalabs and you've developed all these great things. We know exactly what you're interested in. It tells quite a bit about you already just by looking at your wallet. So just love that idea and want to hear more on what you got, because we're definitely thinking on the same wavelength, I think.
Sounds good. Yeah, that's super cool. Thanks for sharing. I think we had someone else, but they dropped off. So the points.
No, I'm still here.
Oh, there you are. Scott,
Lowered
yes,
my hand.
go ahead.
I'm wondering, like, I don't know. So I'm wondering if it's, you know, it's basically, I guess like what, I don't know, somebody put in the chat, it's kind of like a CV or resume of your actions on blockchain or within these communities. But you're getting them, for instance, like Shakan said, is you get them through POAPs or other means of identification for your activities. But are we, I guess part of your TLDR that I'm trying to wrap my head around is, are we talking about like blockchain or are we talking about Cardano? And because if you're talking about blockchain, then I mean, I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of overhead that these other communities that are outside of Cardano have to do in order to validate anything that's in your wallet and to acknowledge that it's identifiable of anything at all. In which case, I would have to refer to the CV and say that's probably a better option, because then you can have your references, people that knew you in the community, people that don't. I mean, people that know you in the community, so those that don't. It's like a point of contact or a referral. And but within the community, I mean, it's within Cardano, even though Cardano can be as vast as it wants to be in the future, maybe if there was some sort of standard for that, you know, that communities did that. Hey, if you want to be in this community, or I mean, you can't put rules because there you go, because now now you're making rules for people. Even with standards, creating standards is still creating rules. So I don't know. I'm just kind of trying to wrap my head around the whole idea as far as the worth of these, the value of these, for instance, POAPs, as far as being onboarded to another community, because technically if blockchain is permissionless and open and all inclusive, then it shouldn't matter what you have in your wallet to work on a project. And so anyway, that's where I'm getting hung up on. But again, I also came in late, I think by like 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's definitely the scope and the overhead that scope invites would be a thing to think through, right? And decide how to approach that. I know stuff like the signatures that were taken out of Vassal makes interoperability easier to answer the blockchain concept. It's hard to imagine what kind of tooling might come out of having those common signature that are shared by other blockchain on the Cardano network. But I don't. Yeah, that's something to think through. The other thing to think through and maybe chat about for a bit, this ability to be able to try stuff, right? To try stuff. So part of this is not to have something that a value repository, right? It's just to have a repository, period. Just the noun, like this is a thing, right? But then value can come from each person that's pulling into that repository of stuff, right? So trying things as far as, okay, maybe we need to have it be NFT based, that's an option. Metadata is an option. DIDs is an option. In my head, and then maybe this sort of crosses the line of standards and imposing things, but I feel like to be able to truly be objective about this person have done a thing, maybe there's value to having these things be sticky, so they're not something that could be traded, unless, I guess, I don't know how people feel about that issue. Is in the world where there's river of stuff swimming around, where communities want to be able to say, hey, you've contributed to open source projects, hence you can have these agencies, even though you just arrived today, right? Your history comes with you. Would that community feel differently if that history was bought? How do people feel about that?
I think I raised my hand. I haven't looked at, I'm looking at the screen now, if I may. Because I think I heard sort of the concern in whoever the last speaker was in their voice. And I think we are going to see projects using this tech and these tools in all kinds of different ways, right? A lot that many of us probably won't agree with, some that are really cool. And it'll involve sort of like proprietary stuff and like tokens and special access. But I think like the way to look at it and what's important is that, like Lido said, right, we do have standards for the way that we do sign and witness things, right? And then as long as this base technology is open source, from there we can create standards, and then they're going to do whatever they want with it, but we will always have an open source reference, right? And possibly more than one standard to do things.
Yeah, definitely building in the open and trying stuff that leads to standards, some sort of organic, natural standards. Has a lot of value, and I think will garner more participation. Yeah, A.
Hey, yeah. So just to expand on the this new question, I think um that we're gonna have interesting situations where what has happened traditionally in the old world, and again, this kind of goes back to the nepotism thing, where if you have a parachute manager, right, basically people who have gone, say, um, a different route, say more academic, and then they end up in a managerial position, right, and did not, sort of climb up the ranks. In a way, that's the equivalent of buying reputation and that kind of thing. So I think what's going to end up happening is we're just going to see similar things happen, right? And this is kind of, I feel, what's happening within Catalyst, where you're having people who have earned and who are playing by the rules and the metrics of the old game, applying it to the new game, right? We haven't got to the point, to have enough inertia to build that momentum, to have the new value here, which is reputation, which is a counter, which is value, which is verifiable, right, within this new paradigm and domain. And a lot of folks, say, within the Bitcoin community, usually criticize other crypto efforts as in a derogatory manner, to call them, IOUs, or the equivalent of basically sort of barter trading, without actually realizing the richness of that. And they mean it as an insult, right? So anyway, coming back to what I think will end up happening, I think all in all, what we're going to end up seeing, even as James, referenced, like, references will be tokenizable. Like, a lot of things, we're just using a richer environment, from a cryptographic and verifiable standpoint, with consensus and so on, verifiability, social dynamics, everything that has existed traditionally within, the social contract, is then going to find its way, or that which makes sense, right? And I think majority of things, especially from a um, resource access control standpoint, a lot of that will just gradually, end up being, within the sort of crypto dynamic. And so, yeah, as people buy reputation, I think it's going to have the same ramifications as, as it's had historically, right? We've even seen this in the context of games. A brilliant example is within games. If you have like dynamic difficulty, or all these other weird, like, loot boxes kind of things, like, people in games take this very seriously. If you try and, like, like, give other people advantages, was it pay for play or whatever the thing is, like, I think this is a really good example of a community, large community majority, who do not stand for that, right? Because they believe in the what's the word, the fair playing field, where they're able to pick, to understand where they fall in the pecking order, right? And not have someone else just use money or anything else to kind of boost them up.
Yeah. Yeah, at the end of the day, it's about proof of work / proof of stake, right? I mean, that's what gets you the most recognition in the communities that are doing this.
Right. How do you prove your work? Go ahead, James.
Mhm.
And every conversation like this has to start from the assumption that wow farms will pop up, right? If there's a way for somebody to sell their reputation token to another, which there is, it's just the native condition of this protocol. then people will, and any system you design simply has to assume that, right? There's no getting by that. So we all have to just move past this moment of idealism and say, yes, of course people will sell any token that represents reputation. And so one implication is people will learn more about why SSID solutions need to exist. And the other is, whether you're waiting for those or designing those, in the meantime, create systems, right? There's plenty of creative things we can do to make it work. I raised my hand because I was thinking about the connection between standards adoption, which a few of us have mentioned, and Dan made a comment earlier about overhead being a big concern for the average user. I see these problems as the same. If you build useful enough stuff, the overhead will be worth it, right? If you build useful enough standards, people will use them. Or hopefully, like I said earlier, they'll argue with you and you'll get to refine those things together. And I think all of us for the next few years are going to be walking a line between the imperative to meet people where they're at, but also the reality that we have to have high expectations for people, right? Humanity learned how to drive cars at some point, right? There was overhead to that, but eventually people decided it was worth it. People learned how to use computers, each on their own timeline, because at a certain point, the overhead for that was worth it. And so we have to build things that are worth it, right? And it's okay that they don't exist yet. There's a lot of tinkering still to do, but we have to, yeah, I wanna keep expectations high. Let's make things as easy as possible, but not easier than that, right? Because we really need people to recognize their role in all of this.
Good points. Yeah, check on.
Yeah, I just wanted to note on the previous topic of reputation. Like if we're talking about reputation in just tokens, not NFTs, I think there the challenge is massive. You can just buy it and then you have reputation. And if that's connected somehow to an on-chain governance system where you just buy the token and then you have more reputation, so you have more voting power, something like that, we're in deep trouble. But if the reputation is based on just social, just that we know that you have XYZ NFTs, and just by knowing you have reputation just amongst peers, like if that's the case, then we have no issue at all. Like it's only a UI issue at that stage. The only thing we need to show is, oh, this person bought their NFTs, and that's it. Like this person didn't generate these things. That's it. If we can get that, I mean, we have solved a big part of the reputation problem. And it's quite simple to do, I think.
Can that social element be codified? So when I was thinking about encoding proof of whatever on the chain that could be interpreted as reputation if a community chooses to, right? Those could also be supplementary, right? They don't have to be the rule. They can be supplementary to say, okay, we're going to look at this history and then we're going to add it to this to also create what reputation means for that community. When I was thinking of it through those lenses, how that history gets recorded to your wallet in my head would be around snapshots and like flows that different communities could create. So it's not that you have 5,000 Gamer tokens, but if we had a flow that says, okay, you can go to this portal and prove that you've gotten, you know, these different transactions from these 50 wallets, to say the snapshot is not that you have Gamer token, but you earn 5,000 Gamer token, right? And that's the snapshot that's in your wallet, right? And that's the thing people can care about if they want to, right? And so other flows, for example, that I was thinking that might be similar to something like the POAPs that people mentioned is that, okay, you have spoken in 15 Twitter spaces as, you know, that was on this topic, right? And that is a path and like a snapshot flow that the people who are interested in Twitter spaces being represented can build if we had a shared understanding of like what that blockchain primitive look like, whether it's an NFT or again, if it's metadata, right? People can sort of decide on the spec, and then each community can be responsible for defining a snapshot flow, right? And that's the thing that can maybe, and in my head, that sort of changes the economics a lot about what it is you're trying to earn and have in your wallet. It also changes, someone mentioned in the chat, you know, things like recertification, right? Like, okay, you got this 3 years ago. What does it mean? It's been 3 years, these kinds of things, right? Because then someone looking at these snapshots, they have what it is you did to achieve it and what that means. And that can be weighed against time, right? So if Gimba token has a 10-year history, it means something different if you earn 1,000 versus if you earn, you know, 3 or 4 different snapshots that amount to 20,000 or something along those lines, right? Time becomes a factor that different communities can give value to. And again, part of this is that we have an entity, some kind of primitive that lives on chain, and then each community can decide for themselves what those primitives mean, right? Go ahead, A. You're live, and Kissy. You have a hot mic.
Casey. Oh, there we go.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to make a quick point here. As someone who's been following a bunch of stuff that's happening from an automation standpoint, or aka AI. Some of you might be familiar with DALI 3. Over the last few months, it's been making a few rounds with just how creative it is. Basically, for those who haven't, it's using AI, which has been trained on a bunch of words and a bunch of images. So you can prompt it, create me a portrait of a dog in the style of Picasso, or something, right? And then it'll produce something like that. And so, this stuff, obviously such models have been created, using a lot of compute, but once they're created, then, you have the outcome, and, and up from that point, what we then have is an ability for them to actually keep improving. One of the things that I recently learned from one of the people working on it was like, hey, by the way, in a few more months, we're going to be at photoreal, right? It's going to be able to produce photoreal stuff in a few months, right? Like, this is something which was released like a few months ago. So this is just the speed of change. The point that I'm trying to make here is things like deep fakes, right? We're going to get to a point where we need to actually identify who it is that we're talking to. And as I see it, identity theft and sort of the veracity, of who we are talking to, is going to be a game of probabilities, right? And going back to James's point, where yes, people are going to try and sell reputation. Absolutely, right? Like, people are going to try to game stuff at every turn, and they should, right? Because a system ought to be robust. So, the point that I suppose I'm trying to make here is that what we're going to end up, like, whatever system we end up choosing has to be as what's the word? Has to be as good as other humans. Like, for you to fake a thing, it will be as weird as someone trying to turn up like face to face with me with like wearing a mask of Darlington. right? And trying to like pass off like, hey, I'm Darlington or something, right? Like it has to like I think, you know, it has to like reach that level. And I think
Yes.
Lost audio.
Was this a fake the whole time? Was this a
months, years,
oh
and
there
not
you
really
are.
like, oh, did I break up? Oh,
Yeah, we lost you for
And I
like 3
think
sentences.
yeah.
oh, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, we lost you at and I think
Oh, okay. Yeah. In summary, I think we're not decades away from this. We are, you know, a handful, you know, or less of years away from identity with really high veracity. You know, from an audio level, visual level, you know, your wallet, etc. Yeah, in a way that preserves privacy.
right, right. One of something about one question or maybe question and concern that comes up if we were to say so proof of whatever exists as an object on the blockchain, and anybody can create that object, whether it's an NFT or a metadata transaction or did. Is that enough? Is that would that be a good place to start? When I was dreaming about this in the different places that I dream about things, um, the some of the stuff that Mithril does, um, which talking about overhead, right? That will require skill set much higher than I have. But if we had signature based threshold for these proofs, right? So if a community can say, and this is where I think Chakan was saying about facilitating the peer-to-peer social aspect of it, right? If anybody can create a proof, you know, go through a portal, or they could build that portal themselves if they were technically inclined to, and say, I did this thing, right? And that proof was associated with a certain community, either via like a policy ID or something along those lines. Having signature threshold to say, yes, this person did the thing, right? So it's much like you will have in real life of knowing each other, right? And then when that signature reaches a certain threshold, that is a transaction, right, to the blockchain. And that's something people can check to be like, not only did this person go through this flow of, okay, I did these 7 things that amounted to this batch or whatever, but then it was endorsed by these 15 people or these 50 people or whatever, right? And that becomes a transaction associated with that thing. And I feel like that sort of direction gives us something similar to what we might have if we're all just in a community in Zoom and just getting to know people. Because perhaps it takes 3 weeks to get that threshold. Perhaps it takes 3 years to get that threshold, whatever, right? But I have no opinion about the feasibility of this. Charles tells me it's possible, and I believed him. I don't know how easy it is to implement, but what are people's thoughts around that? Does that sort of how does that change the calculus of what we've been talking about so far? Let's read in the chat.
Say, what's the question again? Say that again. You make me think so many
Well,
things.
how can we get this real world social aspect of reputation that we have now on chain, right? And where my head was going with that was having basically endorsements, right? So you earn something, but then that thing is also endorsed by other people.
Well, yeah, my comment in chat, I was in TEC for a little bit and they have a system, praise system, whatever, and people just go into Discord and use like I praise, and then you put the username. And then on the back end, whatever it does on the back end, I don't know, I'm not a developer. But if there was something like that with an API or some sort of platform that community can tap into, just like Ethereum's got a bunch of these platforms like Snapshot for voting and gardens and stuff like that. But if there was a platform for Cardano that these other communities, and you don't necessarily have to be a Discord community, maybe you can set up in a forum type setting to where people can just do like I praise or I thank or whatever you want to call it. And I don't know, maybe that's some means of reputation. And I don't know. Anyway, I think it's worth discussion. But
I think so too. Yeah, go ahead, Curtis. No audio, Curtis. The double mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, yes, double mute. So when I ask, that question to myself, your question, and phrased the way that you phrased it, it really feels like the system that we have already developed. There's a series of validation happening in the government level, and it's going through a certification process to make sure that this flow of information has gone through a certain series. There's regulations and policies in place. But the question comes back to, okay, so that's been we've been gatekeeping that. And that's how we built the system that we have today. We're heading towards that same solution, but the gatekeeping, right? To me, it brings it back down to the gatekeeping. Is that decentralized, or are we reintroducing that same level of centralization at those key points? I agree, it's necessary. I feel like we're coming to the same solution that we kind of currently have, which is a series of validations and credentials, and these certain actions have to be maintained and kept, regulated. But how is this different? How do we decentralize these key points of gatekeeping?
Right. Yes.
I have really mixed feelings about the term gatekeeping, right? Because, right? Yeah, it's open and permissionless, right? But if you don't know how to do anything, it doesn't mean anything for you. You have to have studied, you have to have worked to know how to program in Plutus or to program in anything that can be used on a blockchain. It's not open and permissionless if you just got out of high school and you passed with D's. It is, but you're not going to get anywhere in this open and permissionless system because you don't know anything. So like the gatekeeping is too often used for me, because you have to, just about every project that we're aware of in Cardano is dealing with money on some level. And yeah, you have to gatekeep or somebody's going to come and steal your shit.
Right. Well, human experience and everything we know lives on lines, right? And if you add up enough lines, you get boxes and gates and stuff. So I don't know how you get away from it, but yeah.
I wouldn't I wouldn't let Eddie Murphy come into my house every night and do the same comedy routine. You know, I might let him come one time, but if he came the second time and wanted to say the same shit over again, I'd toss his ass out. You know, I'm gatekeeping Eddie Murphy, or willing to. You know, you know, like we all have those boundaries in our personal lives, and we have to have them in crypto.
Well, the world is full
Right.
of people who will keep Eddie Murphy playing, or their you know, cable news channel or whatever else, just so they can be pissed off about it, right? And so those people are here. And on the one hand, yeah, we got to assume that they exist, but the message needs to be, yeah, there's gates. Commons have gates, right? Commons, what distinguishes a commons from an open system is that people can enter the commons if they want to. And if they do, they know the rules that exist within that space. They don't like those rules, they don't have to be there. And any system well, at least in the open source world, any system we design is forkable. Learn from this, use it. You outgrow it, great, here's the source code. Ada is gate kept. You have to get it somehow, right? There's a few ways to do that. If you outgrow Ada, you can build a native asset. You try your own experiments. And eventually, some of the native assets that some of us here have initialized are gonna, you know, are gonna have too high a barrier to entry, whether it's because of the value of a token or because of the expectations for the commons in which that token operates. But people are going to say, that's inaccessible to me. I don't want to play by those rules. And the answer can be, yep, perfect. Here's the source code. And I think that's the most wonderful opportunity we have here. And it's another thing we should assume will happen.
True words. Yes, Big A.
Yo, I was attempting to make a comedian joke. Well,
Multitasking, it's impossible.
exactly. Here's what I was gonna say. Temptation to port reputation from mother to wife, right? This idea, I mean, it's a bit controversial. Yeah, but it makes a lot of sense, right? Historically, from a human perspective, we you know, we have wanted to port reputation, and you know, this example of like, hey, could I take all the trust that I've built up with my mother and be able to port it to this new woman who's now going to be my wife? You know, sort of having to build it from scratch, right? Like, I mean, it's kind of funny, but it's so true. And so, you know, I think, you know, it's similar to, you know, going back to a conversation which we were having earlier in the tokenomics conversation, where distribution matters, right? You know, if in the context, say, of crypto, like the initial distribution matters because, and in this case, the distribution of trust or reputation matters because if I was to, you know, attempt to short circuit, not short circuit, or, you know, go through like path of least resistance in the context of, you know, trying to port my Twitter reputation, you know, my account, which, you know, the creation date is quite old, by the way. So that, or you know, on Discord, right? I think the number after your hashtag, you know, is actually like indicative of like when you joined and that kind of thing. And also all the different interactions. Like if I was to try and do that and sort of port it to a different context, like the system breaks. A great example of this is, and I keep like, I should be getting royalties for the amount of referrals I've made, you know, to this guy. Randy Farmer wrote a book called Web Reputation. I'll put the link in the chat. It's a really brilliant book. This is a guy who's worked in early sort of internet consumer tech, and he was in charge of a bunch of reputation, related stuff, from like, star ratings, thumbs up, thumbs down, and he has some really interesting experience and expertise and sort of insight into this. And one of the key things that he says that you cannot be able to port reputation. There's a brilliant video which I'll put the website to his to this book, as well as a link to the video after I'm done with my little speech here. But basically, yeah, one of the things that he mentions is that there were, at some point in time in the early internet stages, there were some attempts to like use your credit history to be ported into other different contexts, right? To try and, again, short circuit, or not short circuit, to try and path of least resistance, like, hey, let's just try and use this thing in a different context. So anyway, oh, thank you, James, thank you. There you go. Yeah, James has put the link in the chat there, and yeah, please do check it out. Like, it's a really good reference. I cede my time, or whatever the expression is.
Go ahead, Scott. What you got?
Yeah, it went blank now. Yeah, I'll put my hand back up once I remember.
Right. Well, the portability, the one thing with blockchain, right? Portability is a decision, again, that can be made on the edges. So the communities can decide if to honor portability or not. If we go with NFTs as carrier of if NFTs becomes the primitive that holds these proof of accomplishments, right? Then websites can choose to say we're only going to honor the mint transaction, right? Or community can choose that, right? So some community can choose to say, okay, you just have to have it in your wallet, and other community can say, we will only honor the mint transaction of this thing, right? So then portability is not a decision we have to solve at this base foundation framework layer. And I like the idea because, again, you're not going to be able to stop it, but what value means, I don't think that's a problem we should try to solve, right? Juan.
Thank you, Darlington. Yes, I was thinking that this relates, you were mentioning proof certificates, is Mitrol, right? It's part of Mitrol. Are we online? Yeah. So my question is, with the proof certificates, is that something that you do to one person or to a group? Or and again, the question is how much is enough to know about someone to trust that person or the group holding my decision of voting for something. I'm talking about voting here, but it could be done for many other things. So and also is that person is or the group is being endorsed periodically, or is going to be something that you get for life? Maybe we don't know the answer for those things. I'm just thinking of those. The proof certificates versus the reps, because I think we need to start thinking about that right away. I think that's coming. And another question I have is, can a group be a rep instead of one person? I think it's a very important conversation because we are giving one person that capability of saying yes or not for something that we don't have the time or whatever, the skill to see, right? So yeah, I just put those questions on the table for anybody to fit in. Actually, it would be good to know a little better define what is proof certificates.
Right. That's a great question. Great thing, great thing to think about. I think answers to this question would differ depending on who's trying to answer it. If we're trying to get an authoritative to answer it, that's a different response than if we're trying to leave answering it to the parties interested in the answer. Right? This is sort of how Cardano smart contract works, right? If you're interested in the results, you do the computation. And then you submit that result to the blockchain. Yeah, but if anybody else has any comment on that, we'd love to hear it. Scott, do you remember what you were going to say, or did you want to add to this?
I don't know. I think it kind of, well, what Juan said, I did remember what I was going to say. And I think what Juan said as far as the certificates, I think it goes back into like, calculating the age or something, as far as like the continuing education that I put in the chat earlier, as far as how long these certificates are worth, or how long they're valuable or useful for. Like, do they have an expiration date? And I think that gets even, whoever's building out the process, I mean, that's even more overhead, I believe. But is it the issuer's responsibility to determine the longevity of the certificate, or is it actually the person who is accepting that certificate to mean something? Is it on them to determine whether or not that certificate is still valid? Assuming we're talking about like skills KSA certificate type in this discussion. I want to go back, and I'm trying to reverse the conversation, but go back to the gatekeeping thing, kind of what Steve said. It looks like he's AFK. There he is. But the gatekeeping, I think that really depends upon the community in which the token, whatever token it is that you're seeking out, I think it depends on that community and their tokenomics. Because, for instance, Gimbal could easily just be like, hey, you have to pass through these courses in order to hold gimbals or to have these gimbals. So you have to go through the PPBL in order to get gimbals. And that would be straight up gatekeeping. But there are other ways to actually earn that. You can be part of the allocation, one of the allocation working groups. You could be, for instance, in ADAO, you could probably be a note taker and still get some of their tokens over there as well. But I think the level of complexity for the job is, I think there's enough variation in a lot of these communities to where there's not really much gatekeeping as far as who can get it. And I think that's important. I think community founders should actually keep that in mind. And the same thing with ADA. You can buy it, you can earn it, you can win it, you can do these jobs, PA, whatever. So it's there. It's gate kept to an extent, but it's not like pure straight up gatekeeping. Like, no, Steve, you can't have any. Yes, James, you can. Darlington, you can. To me, that's gatekeeping, or saying that everybody who's part of ADAO can't get any tokens in C4C or something of that nature. Like, to me, that's truly gatekeeping, and that's on the lines. That's on the lines of discrimination, also. And I don't think it may be somewhere, it may be visible somewhere in the community, but I haven't seen it myself. I'm not saying that what you said was wrong. I just wanted to touch on that. And then I also wanted to bring up another thing. So I actually do know how to read. And so I read some articles, and there are some articles that I read about developer ethics and developers being fiduciaries, and also developer bias. And so, building out these systems is great, but maybe we should also think about some core fundamental standards for developers also when they're building these systems out, and these token designs. Anyway, because I read some very extremely interesting articles, and it was, anyway, I don't know why I had to read an article to think about it, but I would encourage anybody to read articles up on the bias and ethics and fiduciary, developers of fiduciary.
I think last year when we were talking about a DAO, what gives you rights to vote or whatever in any kind of given DAO, one of the ideas that stuck with me was the idea that your, whatever you've got, whatever gave you validity in a community, it can go stale, right? If you don't contribute, for a year, how can you be expected to be up to date on what's being voted on tomorrow? And so, particularly in a fast moving community. And so I'm saying all that to say, I think one of those standards that needs to be in a reputation or identity kind of token, there should be an easy way to say this is stale. This doesn't take away from what he did 5 years ago, but right now, he's just a guy who did something 5 years ago. He's not, a voter right now.
Yeah, that was, I think that was brought up too, is like your reputation actually degrades over time. And like if you're the one that's getting reputation for, say, teaching somebody, like say James is continuously teaching people PBL, he only gets that reputation one time for each person that he trains. And so eventually his pool of reputation will expire. Like he like there's only so many people in the world that he can teach. And then so that reputation will degrade over time, but then those people that he taught, as they teach other people, so they extend his knowledge, they extend his teachings and the knowledge that they share. And so he gets reputation that way too, but it's not like a full 100% reputation, but it's partial reputation.
Residual reputation.
Yeah, like residual
reputation. That seems like abstractions that could be built on top of this stuff within a different communities as the same fit, right? Like James was saying, you can give meaning to what age people can decide what age means, right? Curtis.
This is actually kind of a question to Scott and Steve on the conversation that you were having. I agree that gatekeeping and gatekeeper term is pretty overused, and I do it myself. I overuse it just because it's an easy way to sort of describe this. But the way you described it, Scott, gatekeeping is enforcing who cannot have this token or access to the token. I completely agree that is gatekeeping. But I have a hard time describing, so what does that information mean to you, right? And so you're a platform and you want to say, do you have this token? Do you have this amount of tokens, whatever the case is? You're gatekeeping, and for a lack of a better word, you're using that information, you're utilizing that information to gate access to your platform. So what would you consider that if not gatekeeping? Because I agree there needs to be a better word for that.
I mean, yeah, I would consider that gatekeeping too, but is it is it completely, I guess what I'm saying, like, is there still a method, a means, mechanism for these people to earn that NFT, that token somewhere in order to join this community, this DAO, or whatever it is that requires you to have a specific NFT? And and I guess it depends on how your NFT set up, your DAO is set up too. I mean, do you want it to be a private community? You want it to be open? The people are within their rights to set up a community any way they see fit. But if you want to active, I'm not trying to back out on what I said, because I still definitely think it's still, if there is no way for somebody to get into an organization or a group, then to me personally, that's discrimination. And even if you look at what is it for investors, where you have to have like $1 million in assets or make 200,000 a year or something, an accredited investor, like that's still gatekeeping to an extent, but people still have the opportunity to go meet those thresholds. They might have to work 6 times harder than anybody else, but that opportunity is still there. And so I guess that's kind of what I'm getting at. As long as the opportunity is there to proceed in whatever community, whatever guidelines are there, then I don't. I'll see. Yeah. Anyway, that's it. Thanks.
As people chime on, they can add to this statement, because I see gatekeeping on its face and discrimination as features, not bugs. But hey, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you. And just to go back to what Scott just said, I think, yeah, the example of an accredited investor, like you can look at it, from two different perspectives. One is quote unquote consumer protection, right? And that the idea of protection and security is in and of itself, has historically been used, for abuse and just, creating, stratification within society and having just the plutocratic nature of things, keep happening, right? Those who have to keep on having more. But then at the same time, I do believe that there's a lot of value in having a discriminating eye, right? And wanting to draw distinctions of where you want to create value or who you want to associate with, right? There are certain situations where, that I can imagine which make a lot of sense. A very simple one here is gender specific, right? Like the expression old boys club, right, is usually seen as as being this negative thing. But in that context, it's usually a specific, I don't know, like a social club which is around a specific thing, whether it's a school or a particular sort of economic small group kind of thing. And I think from a free market economic standpoint, I think that ought to absolutely be allowed, right, provided there aren't like and even in the case where there are unfair advantages in a free market, guess what, people will actually create an alternative and the oxygen will be sucked away from those people who are attempting to abuse resources, right? So yeah, I just want to sort of speak to that, because yeah, the whole idea of gatekeeping, like I've never really um used it, especially in the context of, say, art, right? In the context of the art community. They've been criticized a lot for that, but then like I personally, I've never seen the validity in that, because you self-choose, you self-select to be part of an idea, and some ideas don't have a huge community, right? But then the few people tend to, say, skew to people who really value the idea, and say that then results in per asset higher price or whatever, right? Because they're different kind of group of people kind of thing. But anyway, so the other quick thing I wanted to touch on here is going back to the idea of limitations. I typed in, I think the length of leash in context matters here, by which I meant, like, I think if I was to say, hey James, like, I would give you carte blanche within this particular context. To me, like, that makes a lot of sense compared to just saying I give you complete, like, carte blanche on anything ever in perpetuity kind of thing, right? So like the amount of like leash, and I hate to use the word leash here, but the length of a leash matters, and that you allow people, and also because it's a constraint, it constraints help create creativity, or help fire fuel creativity. So yeah, those are just the quick points I wanted to add to the conversation.
Great points, A. And as we sort of wind down, just to be respectful of people's time, I would like to do a call to action, and then of course we can keep chatting as however we typically do these Tuesday things. But go ahead, James, and then I'll do a call to action.
No, take it away with the call to action, because I'll tie this to what's next.
Oh, cool, perfect. Yeah, so and this is why I started in this space, because you sort of get the implications of these things. You get to think about it outside of the tech, which is important. But we are very eager for a tech. So I would like to be part of a working group if one exists already. If one doesn't exist, I would like us to sort of coalesce and sort of come to the middle here and start sharing ideas and code and specific things to make this a thing. Right, I would like to have some sort of thing we can try, like on mainnet soon. If anybody's interested in that, I will leave all my contact information in the chat. Let's chat it up some more. Maybe let's connect and plan a technical discussion. And then maybe even hit up Catalyst Town Hall 2. That tends to be a little on the wild end of things. A little less predictable, but as many inputs as we can get, that would be good, right? Going back to what did Scott say about developer bias and fiduciary responsibility, thinking about some of that stuff. But let's try something. I'm very much eager to do that. Hit me up.
You said tech broadly speaking, or did you say a specific kind of tech?
I would like the tech, yeah.
Yeah, just the
broadly
broad,
speaking,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
yes. I would
good.
like anything. I would like
Yeah.
specific outputs, like code bases, reference implementations, standards, object definition standards that people can start to mint, those kinds of things. Whether or not we're gonna use a one NFT policy or not, or separate NFTs, like something to do, like some kind of open source output.
Yeah. Great. Well, actually, so we usually at this time transition out of the playground meeting and into a discussion about ongoing work in the Plutus PBL course. And so everybody's welcome to stick around for that. I do think there are some implications here. Some really fascinating concepts coming out today. You know, just Scott, while you were talking, like, I really think you're describing the commons, and that's really exciting. And commons do have gates, right? They do have an agreement that you have to make to participate, and there's rules there. And the responsibility of all of us is to communicate those rules as clearly as possible, right? We may not arrive at standards fully formed, but the least we can do is everything we can to make sure that people understand the rules. And we don't have a responsibility to anyone to change those rules, right? Using the word standards in a different way, you know, a development team needs to have standards about the level of work that's required, right? If it's ever going to even take itself seriously. And so, Scott, I also liked what you added about, hey, listen, somebody might have to work harder, but as long as they know the rules, they can decide whether they're going to participate in that. So this is kind of what we're looking at here. We wrapped the Plutus PBL course last week. And what we're working on right now are first and foremost the rules for how completion of the course leads to the opportunity to contribute. We may be, along the way, prototyping a standard that would be used for reputation, but that's not at all a goal. All right, we're giving ourselves a starting point so that we can test it, see how well it works, and start to create a standard from there. So that's the moment we're in. I'm really excited. I have some one technical idea that I forget who was talking that made me think of this, but I wonder about the potential of NFT projects to experiment with reputation so that people game them as we expect them to, but then there's like a gotcha moment where it leads to some uproar, and then the creators of the project have the ability to say, see, look what you just learned. That's what happens, and that's why we need fill in the blank, right? Like these are, there may be opportunities for kind of performative experiments, to give people experiences as they start to appreciate what this technology requires of them to actually make use of it. Okay, so let's check this out. Yeah, Chakan, see you soon, man. Yeah, well, and so Gimbal is interesting because there's, at least I don't see any rules ever being written about who can hold gimbals, right? What there will be very clear rules about is who can contribute to this or that project and who has decision-making power over what projects we prioritize. And like I said earlier in another meeting, I believe very strongly that those two things, who can contribute to a project and who has decision-making power, should be completely independent from how many gimbals you hold. We'll see, right? So what should decision-making power and ability to contribute be based on? That's the project that we're working on right now as PBL wraps. And so we had a call about this specifically last week. And I'm just going to transition here because I do think these things are related. So keep the playground thoughts going just as you take a look at this. Okay, so coming out of the course, we've told people from the beginning of the course that the course completion token is one of the projects we'll work on. And I'll drop this link in the chat just so people have it. And now, because we need this to create the instance of the Gimbal Bounty Treasury and Escrow that people will be able to contribute to coming out of the course, we have to make some decisions. And we have to use a course completion token that's good enough to get started. Probably not the model that it will be in the long term, but good enough to start. So this is